Human treated an alien girl like anyone else, and she realized it was the freedom she'd sought. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Zelira was a creature of a different world. Her eyes, a glowing shade of violet, scanned the unfamiliar landscape around her with a mixture of distrust and curiosity. Her skin shimmered a soft blue under the pale light of the alien sun, a shade that seemed to draw attention wherever she went. She had been exiled from her home planet, discarded as less than, forced into the confines of a foreign world she didn't understand. She had always been taught that her worth was tied to her strength and her status, that the rules of her people were the only truth. But now, alone on Earth, she was forced to confront the world outside of those rigid ideals. She wandered the city streets, a towering figure of alien beauty and silent rebellion. The humans here seemed oblivious to her presence, too busy with their daily routines to give her more than a passing glance. To Zelira, this felt both strange and liberating. For once, she wasn't the center of attention, wasn't held to the judgment of others. She was just another person, walking among the crowd, blending in without effort. But it wasn't until she met Ethan Hunter that everything began to shift. Ethan was a human unlike any she had encountered before. Tall, with short brown hair and eyes that seemed to hold a quiet understanding, he didn't look at her as most humans did, with a mixture of awe, fear, or curiosity. No. When Ethan saw her, it was as though she were just another person, someone worthy of basic decency. There was no awe in his gaze, no wariness or apprehension. Just a man, offering a simple act of kindness. It happened one afternoon when Zelira, lost in her thoughts, wandered into a local cafe. The clink of coffee cups and the hum of conversation filled the air, but it was the sudden sound of someone approaching her that pulled her from her trance. Ethan, with a warm smile, gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, his voice casual and inviting. Zelira, who had been used to avoiding others' gazes, looked at him for a long moment. She was used to being seen as something different, but Ethan just waited, his expression kind and patient. After a moment of hesitation, she nodded and sat down. As they talked, Zelira found herself opening up, something she hadn't done in years. She had expected to feel out of place, awkward, or even condescended to. Instead, she found herself feeling normal. Ethan treated her no differently than he would anyone else. He didn't care that she was an alien, didn't make her feel inferior. There was something about his presence, about the way he looked at her like she was just a person, that began to chip away at the wall she had built around herself. She realized, in that moment, that she hadn't truly known freedom until she met him. Not freedom in the physical sense. She had been free to go wherever she pleased. No, the freedom she sought was the freedom to exist without judgment, without being defined by her race or her past. Ethan had given her that, just by treating her like anyone else. And for the first time in her life, Zelira understood that freedom wasn't something given by others. It was something you claimed for yourself. The next few days were a blur for Zelira. She found herself returning to the small cafe every afternoon, where Ethan would be waiting, always ready with a warm smile and a quiet conversation. Each time they met, she felt a little more at ease, a little more like she belonged in this strange new world. Ethan never asked her about her past. He didn't press her to reveal anything she wasn't ready to share. Instead, he talked about Earth, about the people he had met, about the simple joys of everyday life. He spoke of his family, his job, and his dreams, small things, but things that made her realize just how much she had been missing. She had always thought of freedom as a grand, distant concept. To her, freedom had always been about power, about control. But now, with each passing day, she started to understand that freedom could also mean something simpler, something softer. The ability to just be. Ethan treated her like a person, not a weapon or an object. It was this basic dignity that had been absent from her life for so long. As their friendship grew, Zelira began to open up in ways she had never expected. She told him stories about her home planet, about the customs of her people, about the struggles she had faced. Ethan listened patiently, never judging, never looking at her like she was anything less than human. It was in these moments that she began to realize how far she had come from the cold, distant person she had been when she first arrived on Earth. She was no longer the alien who only saw herself as a tool for a greater purpose. She was just Zelira, a person with feelings, dreams, and desires of her own. One afternoon, as they sat on the small terrace outside the cafe, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Ethan looked at her with a thoughtful expression. "You know, I've never met anyone quite like you," he said quietly. "You've been through so much, but you still stand strong." Zelira was silent for a moment, considering his words. "I never really thought about it that way," she replied. "I've always had to be strong, to fight, to survive." Ethan nodded, his eyes softening. "I get that, but I think you've earned the right to be more than just strong. You've earned the right to live freely, to choose your own path." His words hit her like a revelation. For so long, she had believed that strength was her only true value. She had believed that survival was all that mattered. But now, sitting there with Ethan, something deep within her began to shift. She realized that the freedom she had been searching for all along wasn't just about escaping her past. It was about having the chance to choose her own future. Ethan's kindness had shown her that. He had given her something she hadn't even known she needed. The chance to simply be herself, without fear, without judgment. And in that moment, Zelira felt a spark of something new within her. Hope. Hope that she could build a life here, not as a weapon or a pawn, but as someone with a future, a person who could make her own decisions. Ethan smiled at her, as if he could sense the shift in her. "I'm glad you're here," he said softly. "You deserve a chance at happiness." Zelira looked at him, her heart full. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she might actually have one. The feeling was both foreign and exhilarating. It was the freedom she had always sought, but never thought possible. Zelira's life in the human city began to shift in ways she could never have imagined. Each day felt like a new discovery, not just about the world around her, but about herself. The more she spent time with Ethan, the more she realized that freedom wasn't just an abstract concept. It was something she could actually feel, something she could hold on to. She started to embrace the small moments, the simple pleasures she had long denied herself. Walking through the park, laughing over cups of coffee, and talking about everything and nothing all at once. These were things she had never allowed herself to experience in her previous life. One day, as they sat on a bench overlooking a lake, Ethan turned to her with a smile that seemed to reach into her very soul. "Zelira, have you ever thought about what you want for yourself?" he asked. She stared at him for a moment, the question settling in her mind like a stone. What did she want for herself? For so long, her existence had been defined by others, by her people, by her mission, by her past. But now, here on Earth, she was learning that her life could be her own. I think I want to learn," she replied slowly. "I want to know what it feels like to live without constantly looking over my shoulder, to make decisions that are my own." Ethan's smile deepened, and there was a warmth in his eyes that made Zelira's heart beat a little faster. "Then that's what we'll do," he said. And for the first time in her life, Zelira believed him. Over the next few weeks, Zelira immersed herself in human life in a way she had never imagined possible. She explored the city, learned about Earth's history, and even took up a few hobbies. She learned how to cook simple human meals, something she found oddly comforting. And with every new experience, every new connection, she felt herself becoming more and more of the person she had always wanted to be. But there was one thing that weighed on her, a question she had yet to fully answer. Could she ever truly belong here? Could she live a life free of the past that still clung to her, even in this new world? Ethan had shown her what it meant to live without judgment, but she still struggled with the shadows of her old self. It wasn't until one quiet evening, as they walked through the city's bustling streets, that Zelira finally voiced the question that had been gnawing at her. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice barely rising above the noise of the crowd, "do you ever wonder if I'm just too different? If I'm too far removed from everything you know?" Ethan looked at her, his face unreadable for a moment. Then he reached out and gently took her hand. "Zelira, you are different, but that doesn't mean you don't belong. It's the differences that make you special. They make you you." His words hit her like a wave. It was the simple truth she had been searching for, the truth she had been afraid to admit to herself. She wasn't just an alien. She was an individual with her own desires, her own future. And that future, for the first time, seemed wide open. The future. For Zalira, these moments had become the new measure of freedom. But despite the peace she had found, something still lingered within her, a quiet, nagging voice that reminded her of the past, of the life she had left behind. She had been exiled, cast out by her own people, and though she had escaped the physical chains of her former life, the emotional scars were harder to erase. One afternoon, as they sat together in a quiet cafe, Ethan noticed the distant look in her eyes. He had grown accustomed to seeing her deep in thought, but today, there was something different about the way she carried herself. "Zalira," he asked gently, "what's on your mind?" She looked at him, her violet eyes meeting his, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of her past pressing in on her. She took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts. "Ethan, sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be able to truly forget who I was, where I came from. I know you've shown me what it means to be free, but my past still feels like a shadow that follows me everywhere I go." Ethan didn't say anything at first. He simply reached across the table, his hand resting gently on hers. "Zalira," he said, his voice soft but firm, "you don't have to forget who you were. It's a part of you, and it always will be. But that doesn't mean it has to define you. You're not bound by your past anymore. You're here, now, with the chance to make something new, something that's yours." His words were simple, but they struck a chord deep within her. She had spent so much time running from her past, trying to outrun it, that she hadn't stopped to think about how it had shaped her into the person she was today. It wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was a part of her journey, a part of what made her unique. "You're right," Zalira said quietly, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I've spent so long trying to escape who I was. I forgot to embrace who I'm becoming." Ethan squeezed her hand. "Exactly. You're not the person you were back home. You've grown, you've changed. And most importantly, you've allowed yourself to be free." As the sun began to set, outside, casting a warm glow across the city, Zalira felt a shift inside herself. The weight she had carried for so long began to lift, if only a little. She wasn't completely free from her past, but she had finally learned to stop letting it control her. With Ethan by her side, she felt like she could face whatever came next. The future no longer seemed so daunting. For the first time in her life, she felt like she could truly be herself. Not just an alien in a foreign world, but a person with a future all her own. As they left the cafe, hand in hand, Zalira walked with a new sense of purpose. She was no longer just surviving, she was living. And for the first time in years, she felt like the future was hers to shape. As the months passed, Zalira's life on Earth became more and more rooted in the simple joys she had never known. She had come to love the rhythm of daily life, waking up early, enjoying breakfast with Ethan, and sharing quiet moments in the evening. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, truly living. For the first time, she realized that the freedom she had longed for was not just the absence of chains, but the ability to choose her own path. Ethan had shown her what it meant to live without fear, and with each passing day, she began to embrace the possibilities of her future. They spent time exploring the city, visiting museums, hiking through nearby forests, and even attending a local concert together. Every new experience felt like a piece of a puzzle coming together, a reminder that her life was hers to shape. But despite all the peace she had found, there were moments when Zalira could not escape the pull of her past. It was never the loud, intrusive memories that haunted her. It was the quiet ones, the whispers that came when she was alone. The pressure to prove herself, the feeling of being an outsider, of being different. Sometimes, when she walked through the crowded streets, she still felt like an alien in a world that would never fully accept her. Ethan saw it, of course. He wasn't blind to the moments when she seemed distant, lost in her thoughts. But he never pressed her to talk about it. He simply gave her the space she needed and remained a steady presence in her life. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their apartment, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the sky, Ethan turned to her, his voice soft. "You've come a long way, Zalira," he said, his eyes warm with affection. "I've seen how much you've changed, how much you've grown. But I know that part of you still wonders if you'll ever truly belong. Zelira didn't respond at first. She simply gazed at the stars, the cool breeze rustling her hair. Ethan was right, of course. She did wonder every day. I don't know if I'll ever truly fit in, she admitted after a long pause. There are days when I feel like I'm still carrying the weight of my past, like it's following me no matter where I go. Ethan's hand found hers, and he squeezed it gently. You belong here, Zelira. You belong with me. His words were simple, but they carried more weight than anything else he had ever said. Zelira turned to look at him, her heart swelling with emotions she had never fully allowed herself to feel. I'm not just a human to you, am I? She asked softly. Ethan smiled, a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. No, you're not just a human. You're you. And that's more than enough. In that moment, something inside Zelira shifted. She realized that she didn't need to be like everyone else. She didn't need to blend in or hide parts of herself to feel accepted. She was who she was, and that was enough. The world didn't need to define her. She could define herself. As the evening wore on, Zelira felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before. She was no longer looking over her shoulder, wondering if she would ever be enough. She was enough, and she had found a place where she was loved and accepted for exactly who she was. Ethan had shown her that, just by being there, by seeing her as an equal. And for the first time, Zelira felt truly free, not just from the past, but from the fear of what might come next. The future was hers, and she was ready to face it, with Ethan by her side. As time continued to pass, Zelira felt her life on Earth becoming more entwined with Ethan's. She was no longer just an observer of human life, but an active participant in it. She started to feel more confident in her own skin, as though the weight of her past had truly begun to fade away. Her mornings no longer began with the haunting memories of her exile, and her nights were filled with dreams of possibilities, rather than fears of the unknown. Ethan was by her side every step of the way, offering her unwavering support. Their bond had deepened, not just out of mutual understanding, but out of something even more powerful, trust. Zelira had never trusted anyone as much as she trusted Ethan. He had shown her the beauty of living a life free of fear and judgment, a life that she had never thought possible. But even as she settled into her new life, the world around her was changing. News of alien visitors, of the struggles between different worlds, began to surface more frequently. Zelira had heard the whispers, the growing tensions between Earth and other galactic civilizations. It wasn't something she had paid much attention to at first. Earth was her home now, and that was all that mattered. But as time went on, she realized that the peace she had found here was fragile. One evening, as they sat together in their apartment, the quiet hum of the city outside, Zelira spoke up, her voice softer than usual. Ethan, do you ever think about what might happen if things changed? If the world we live in isn't as safe as we think? Ethan looked at her, his brow furrowed in concern. What do you mean? He asked, his voice steady, but laced with the concern he always had for her well-being. Zelira took a deep breath, the weight of her words pressing down on her. I mean, what if something happens to Earth? What if people from my past, people I left behind, come looking for me? I don't know if I can protect this life we've built together. Ethan's gaze softened as he reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Zelira, we've faced the unknown together before. We've built a life here, and that life is ours to protect. Whatever comes, we will face it as we always have, with each other. His words were simple, but in them, she found the reassurance she needed. Zelira knew that the road ahead would not always be easy. There would be challenges, perhaps even dangers, but with Ethan by her side, she knew she was not alone. As they sat in the quiet of their apartment, watching the lights of the city twinkle far below, Zelira realized that the life she had dreamed of, one filled with peace, love, and freedom, was within reach. She had found it, not in the absence of danger, but in the courage to face whatever came, knowing that she would never have to face it alone. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She was ready to live it, one step at a time, with Ethan beside her. Months passed, and the world around Zelira seemed to continue turning at its normal pace. But inside her, things were shifting in ways she couldn't entirely understand. Ethan had become more than just her anchor. He was her partner, her equal, her home. Every moment with him was a piece of the future she had always dreamed of but never thought was possible. Yet, despite the comfort she had found in her new life, the world outside was starting to change. The whispers had become louder, more frequent. The news reports, once distant and irrelevant, began to creep into her daily thoughts. Earth, the home she had come to love, was becoming a point of interest not just for the beings on her planet, but for others, beings from her past. She had been a part of a galaxy far more complicated than she had ever imagined, and the life she thought she had left behind was never really gone. One day, after weeks of silence on the matter, Zelira couldn't ignore the thoughts any longer. She knew she had to talk to Ethan, the one person she trusted above all else. As they sat in their living room, the sunlight streaming in through the windows, Zelira turned to him, her face serious. "Ethan, I need to talk to you about something. Something that's been on my mind for a while now." Ethan looked at her, sensing the weight in her voice. He set down the book he was reading, giving her his full attention. "Of course," he said, his voice calm and inviting. "What's on your mind?" Zelira took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts before speaking. "I've been hearing things. There's talk about the galactic alliances, about shifts in power. It's not just gossip anymore. Earth is becoming more and more involved in things that are out of our control. And, to be honest, I'm afraid. I'm afraid that my past, the people I left behind, are going to find me again. And if that happens, I don't know what it means for you or for us." Ethan's expression softened. He could hear the fear in her voice, the uncertainty that still lingered in her heart. "Zelira," he said gently, reaching for her hand, "I can't promise that everything will always be easy, but I can promise that we'll face whatever comes together. You're not alone in this. We've built something real here, something worth protecting. And I'm not going anywhere." His words were simple, but they cut through the cloud of fear that had been hanging over her. Zelira looked into his eyes, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that the life they had together was worth whatever challenges might come their way. "I don't want to lose this," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to lose you." Ethan smiled softly, squeezing her hand. "You won't. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. And we'll make it through, just like we always have." There was something in his words, something in the way he looked at her that made Zelira feel like, for the first time in a long while, she wasn't alone in this vast, complicated universe. The weight of her past no longer seemed as heavy. She had Ethan, and that was all that mattered. With a renewed sense of clarity, Zelira knew that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them with Ethan by her side. And for the first time, she felt truly ready to take on the future, whatever it might hold. The days that followed were a blend of normalcy and quiet anticipation. Zelira had grown more comfortable with the rhythm of her new life, the life she had built with Ethan. They spent their mornings together in the garden of their small home, sipping coffee and talking about the future. They spent their afternoons exploring the nearby trails, hiking through the forests, or simply sitting by the lake, watching the water ripple beneath the soft breeze. Yet, as peaceful as their days had become, there was still the lingering sense of unease that shadowed Zelira's thoughts. Earth had become her home, but the uncertainty of the galaxy's future was still a heavy weight on her mind. It was during one of these quiet moments, sitting on the porch with Ethan, when Zelira finally decided to speak her mind. "Ethan," she began, her voice soft but resolute, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other night, about facing whatever comes together." Ethan turned to her, his gaze warm and understanding. "What's on your mind?" he asked, reaching out to take her hand. Zelira took a deep breath before continuing. "I think I'm ready. Ready to face whatever comes, whatever is waiting out there in the galaxy. I don't know what it will look like, but I can't live in fear anymore." Ethan's smile softened, and he squeezed her hand. "You don't have to do it alone," he reassured her. "We'll face it together, just like we always have." Zelira nodded, feeling a sense of clarity settle over her. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about choosing her path, taking control of her future, and embracing the unknown with courage. It wasn't easy, and it wouldn't be without challenges, but with Ethan by her side, she knew she could face anything. As the days passed, Zelira began to take steps toward embracing her future. She reached out to the few contacts she had left from her time in the galaxy, cautiously testing the waters, trying to understand the larger currents that were beginning to stir. The news was mixed, some positive, some concerning. But nothing seemed to threaten the peace they had built, at least, not yet. Despite the uncertainty, Zelira felt a sense of resolve she hadn't felt in years. She had spent so long running from her past, from her identity, but now she understood that her past didn't have to define her. She could choose her future. Together, she and Ethan started to plan, not just for their survival, but for their lives. They discussed travel, the places they wanted to visit, the people they still wanted to meet. They talked about building a future, not just a life that was safe from the past, but a life that was full of purpose and meaning. The weight that had once threatened to crush her began to feel lighter, as though the freedom she had always sought was not a destination, but a state of mind. Zelira wasn't just a fugitive anymore. She was a person with agency, with a future, and with the person she loved beside her. There was still a part of her that felt the pull of the galaxy's unknowns, the pull of her past, but it no longer controlled her. She had chosen her path, and with Ethan, she was ready to walk it, no matter where it led. As they stood on the edge of their future, Zelira realized something powerful. She had finally found what she had always been searching for. Not just freedom, but a sense of belonging. Not just survival, but a life worth living. The weeks that followed were filled with a new sense of purpose for Zelira and Ethan. They had found their rhythm, not just as survivors, but as partners in every sense of the word. Together, they forged ahead, facing whatever challenges came their way with a sense of resolve that neither of them had expected. Zelira, once uncertain about her place in this world, now walked with a confidence that came from knowing she could control her own destiny. Ethan's presence in her life had become the solid foundation upon which she could build a future. They had begun to explore new horizons, both in the physical sense and the emotional one. The peace they had found was no longer fragile. It had grown stronger with time, like a quiet promise they made to each other each day. They began planning for the future, not just in terms of survival, but in terms of thriving. They talked about their dreams, about the places they wanted to visit, the experiences they wanted to share, and the life they wanted to build. For the first time, Zelira realized that her dreams were no longer centered around escape. They were about the freedom to choose, the freedom to love, and the freedom to grow. She was no longer defined by the exile that had once marked her. Earth had become her home, not because she was running from something, but because she had chosen it, because she had chosen a life here with Ethan. Yet, there were moments when her past would creep back in, like a shadow lurking at the edges of her consciousness. She had been an outcast, a fugitive, and sometimes, in the quiet moments of reflection, she could still feel the sting of that loneliness. But now, those moments were different. They didn't define her anymore. They were just pieces of her past, pieces that had helped shape who she had become. As she sat one evening with Ethan, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Zelira found herself reflecting on how far she had come. "You know," she said, her voice soft but steady, "I never thought I could feel at peace again. I thought I was always going to be running, always going to be looking over my shoulder." Ethan turned to her, a gentle smile on his face. "You're not running anymore," he said. "You're living, and you've earned every moment of it." Zelira smiled, feeling the weight of his words sink in. They were true. She wasn't running anymore. She had found a place where she could be herself, without fear, without shame. She had found a place where she could be free, and that was enough. As the days passed, they continued to build their life together, brick by brick. They were no longer defined by their pasts or their circumstances. They were defined by the choices they made, the love they shared, and the future they were creating. The universe, with all its vastness and uncertainty, no longer felt like something to fear. It was simply a part of the journey, a journey that Zelira was no longer alone in. With Ethan beside her, she knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. And for the first time in her life, that was enough. The future was no longer a distant hope. It was their reality, and it was filled with endless possibilities.